Liam Westbrook stood on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, gazing out over the city skyline. The view, as always, was breathtaking. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the glass buildings, the golden light reflecting off the glass and steel that represented everything Liam had worked for. A life of wealth, power, and luxury. At least that's what it appeared to be, but in reality, it was a gilded cage. At 35 years old, Liam had it all. He was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar restaurant empire, a young, ambitious entrepreneur who had built his empire from the ground up. His sharp mind, relentless drive, and keen instincts had earned him the success others could only dream of. His life, however, felt hollow, disconnected from the world that ordinary people inhabited. Every day it felt like he was living in a bubble, surrounded by yes-men, socialites, and shallow acquaintances, all of them eager to cater to his every whim because of his wealth. He had no real friends, no deep connections, no understanding of what it was like to struggle. Liam had always been the type of person who valued achievement over everything else, an intense, driven individual with a cold, calculating persona to match. He was known for his precision, his ability to make tough decisions quickly and decisively. But recently, something had started to eat away at him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt lost. He missed the simplicity of his early days, when he wasn't just a brand or a man in charge of a corporation, but someone who worked hard to make ends meet. That was when the idea hit him. He needed a fresh start. He needed to reconnect with what truly mattered. The very things that had once motivated him, the passion for his work, the excitement of building something meaningful, had become tainted by the constant pressure of maintaining his empire. And so Liam made a decision. He would leave his high-powered position and work undercover at one of his own restaurants. He wanted to see the world from the perspective of the people who made his business thrive, the employees who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. It was a drastic move, one that would have most of his colleagues shaking their heads in disbelief. But Liam didn't care. He felt trapped in his own success. It was time to step out of the shadows and into the heart of the operation. Emma Hayes had never been one to dream of a life of luxury or fame. At 28, she was still figuring out what her future would look like, but she knew it wasn't going to be in a cramped, noisy kitchen or dealing with difficult customers day after day. Yet, for now, it was her reality. She was a waitress at one of Liam Westbrook's restaurants, working long hours, earning just enough to get by, and quietly building her dream of opening a small cafe of her own one day. She had always been a dreamer, even as a child, imagining herself running her own little cafe filled with the aroma of freshly baked pastries and the hum of lively conversation. But life had a way of complicating things. Emma had learned the hard way that dreams didn't come true just by wishing for them. She was still fighting for that dream, still working tirelessly to make it happen, while the weight of her reality threatened to crush her at times. Her colleagues often made it difficult for her. Emma had always been the kind of person who wore her heart on her sleeve, who believed in kindness and helping others. But in the fast-paced, cutthroat world of the restaurant business, that often made her a target. She had learned to endure the subtle bullying, the dismissive comments, the passive-aggressive jabs from the more established members of the staff. The most difficult of these was Mark, a senior chef who ran the kitchen with a mix of arrogance and cruelty. Emma had learned early on that, in this environment, standing up for herself often meant facing even harsher treatment. But what they didn't know about her was that her determination burned quietly beneath the surface. She had a fire within her that no one could extinguish. The hardships she faced only made her more resilient. Emma didn't have the luxury of walking away from her job or giving up on her dreams. She had to keep going, even if it meant taking the hardest route possible. Physically, Emma was in her prime, 28, with long chestnut hair, bright hazel eyes that carried a quiet but determined strength, and a smile that was always welcoming, even on her toughest days. She wasn't stunning in the conventional sense, but there was something magnetic about her personality. She had a way of making everyone around her feel like they mattered, whether they were a customer, a colleague, or a stranger. Her co-workers often took advantage of her kind nature, seeing her as an easy target for their bullying. Mark, in particular, enjoyed making her feel small, often belittling her aspirations. He didn't see her as a threat, but rather as someone who wouldn't make it in the competitive restaurant world. Emma was painfully aware of how little she was appreciated in this toxic environment, but she refused to give up. She had no choice but to stay and make the best of it, even though it was exhausting her. Liam's decision to step into the restaurant as an anonymous employee was not just about learning the inner workings of the business. It was about testing himself. It was about stripping away the facades of wealth and status and seeing if he could rediscover who he was beneath it all. He would take on the role of Nick, a simple cook, and throw himself into the grueling, underappreciated life of a kitchen worker. No one would know who he truly was. Not the waitstaff, not the chefs, not even the other employees. He would be just another worker, just another person trying to make a living. As Liam, Nick, settled into his new role at the back of the kitchen, he was immediately struck by the contrast in personalities among the staff. Most of the kitchen workers were focused and efficient, but there was an undercurrent of tension. The head chef, Mark, barked orders with an arrogance that made it clear he didn't care much for the well-being of his staff, only for the perfect execution of the dishes. He moved with the air of someone who believed his position in the kitchen was unquestionable, his reputation built on intimidation rather than genuine leadership. It was here, amid the chaos, that Liam first saw her, Emma. She was moving between the dining room and the kitchen with a sense of purpose, her hands steady as she delivered plates to tables, all the while greeting customers with a warmth that was almost magnetic. Despite the rush, despite the pressure of the dinner service, Emma's smile never wavered. It was a small gesture, but it set her apart from the rest of the staff. Where others looked at the customers as a means to an end, Emma genuinely seemed to care about their experience. Liam's attention shifted as he watched her from the kitchen window. The way she carried herself was different from the others. There was a quiet grace about her, but it wasn't just that. There was something in her eyes, a spark of hope mixed with something else, something deeper. He couldn't quite put his finger on it yet, but he knew there was more to her than met the eye. As the dinner rush intensified, the kitchen became a cacophony of shouts, orders, and the frantic clatter of plates and pans. Liam, or Nick, was quickly getting into the swing of things, trying to keep his head down and focus on his duties. He was slicing vegetables, prepping the next round of orders, and sweating under the heat of the stoves. But as he was plating a dish, the door to the kitchen swung open, and Emma appeared, her face flushed from the fast-paced demands of the floor. She had a stack of dirty dishes in her hands, but her usual calm demeanor was replaced by a slight panic in her eyes. She quickly assessed the situation and, without missing a beat, turned to one of the servers. "I need a minute to catch up back here," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. The server nodded and quickly passed her another stack of orders. Liam watched, fascinated. Emma had always seemed so composed when interacting with customers, but in the kitchen, she seemed just as driven, working in sync with the chaos, yet with a visible strain pulling at her. She was holding it together, but just barely. It was then that he saw the subtle signs of the invisible weight she carried. Her shoulders tensed, her smile starting to waver, and the way her eyes darted around, searching for a way to stay on top of everything. "Need some help?" Liam's voice was quiet, almost lost amidst the noise of the kitchen, but Emma turned sharply, surprised to hear someone offer. She blinked for a moment as if the offer hadn't quite registered. "I'm fine, thanks," she said quickly. brushing off the suggestion with a polite smile. But Liam could see through the facade. She was overwhelmed. He didn't want to overstep, but something in him urged him to help. After all, he wasn't just here to observe. He wanted to make a difference, even if it was small. He stepped closer to the sink, where Emma was hurriedly scrubbing a pile of plates. "You sure?" he asked again, this time offering a hand to help her with the dishes. Emma hesitated. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the offer, it was that she was used to doing everything herself. It was easier that way. No one else took her seriously enough to offer help. And the last thing she wanted was to appear weak, especially not in front of someone who would likely judge her for not being able to keep up. But something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't condescending. It wasn't forced. There was no air of superiority or entitlement, just a genuine offer to help. She let out a soft sigh. "I guess I could use a hand." They worked in silence for a few moments, scrubbing and rinsing. Liam was surprised by how quickly he fell into the rhythm of the work. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was satisfying in its own way. He glanced over at Emma occasionally, watching her move with an efficiency that didn't go unnoticed, even in the midst of the chaos. Finally, after a while, Emma spoke again, breaking the silence. "I don't think I've seen you around before," she said, tilting her head as she glanced at him. "Are you new?" "You could say that," Liam replied with a small smile. "I'm Nick. Just started today." She raised an eyebrow but didn't question it further. She had learned not to pry too much into the lives of the transient workers in the restaurant world. But there was something about him. He wasn't like the others. She couldn't place it, but he seemed different. It wasn't just the quiet demeanor or the fact that he wasn't rushing to get out of the kitchen as soon as the shift was over. There was something genuine about him, even if she couldn't explain why she felt that way. The rest of the shift passed quickly, and Emma found herself glancing toward the kitchen window more often than she intended. She hadn't seen much of Nick. He was mostly behind the scenes, working quietly. But whenever he spoke, there was a calmness to his voice that stood out in the frenetic chaos of the kitchen. At the end of the night, after the last orders were served and the restaurant started to empty, Emma found herself caught in a rare moment of stillness. She stood by the back door, preparing to leave for the night when Nick appeared, carrying a tray of empty glasses. "You did a good job tonight," he said, surprising her once again. Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Thanks." For a moment their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't a deep conversation or a grand gesture, just a quiet acknowledgement of the hard work they had both put in that night. "I'll see you tomorrow," Liam said softly, his voice sincere. Emma nodded, watching him disappear into the kitchen. It was the first real interaction they had, but it had left an impression. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she felt like she had just met someone who wasn't like everyone else in the restaurant. And for the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The following week passed in a blur of chaos and routine. The restaurant was always busy, always teeming with customers, each one expecting top-notch service, delicious meals, and a seamless dining experience. Liam, still undercover as Nick, had quickly fallen into the rhythm of the job. His tasks ranged from food prep to cleaning, assisting in the kitchen, and helping with dishes. Every day he grew more accustomed to the pace, though it was far from easy. There were moments when his muscles ached from standing all day, when the heat of the kitchen felt suffocating, and when the weight of the expectations weighed heavily on him. But through it all, there was Emma. He watched her, always in motion, moving between tables with an effortless grace. Despite the frantic nature of the work, Emma carried herself with a quiet strength. She smiled at the customers, no matter how demanding or rude they might be, and greeted them as though they were the most important people in the room. Her compassion was disarming, and it struck Liam every time he saw her interact with someone. It wasn't just her smile. It was the way she made people feel seen and heard, as though she truly cared about their experience. Liam had begun to look forward to the fleeting moments when he could work alongside her. There was a strange sense of camaraderie between them, though they hadn't yet had much in-depth conversation. Still, there was an unspoken understanding, a recognition of hard work and perseverance in each other. As the days went by, he found himself increasingly drawn to her, not just because of her kindness, but because of the depth he sensed in her. The days that followed were a whirlwind of shifts, pressure, and unexpected moments of calm. Each day, Liam found himself growing more attached to Emma, not just because of her kindness or her natural ability to make everyone around her feel comfortable, but because of her strength. He could see the weight of the world in her eyes, the way she carried the burden of others' expectations, and it made him want to protect her in some way. There was an undeniable spark between them, something unspoken, yet understood. Emma, for the first time in a long while, began to look forward to her shifts, not because of the work itself, but because of the fleeting moments she shared with Nick. There was a quiet chemistry between them, something simple but profound. She had never expected to form any kind of bond with someone like him, a temporary worker, a stranger. But there was something real in his eyes, something that made her feel seen. It wasn't just his compliments, though those helped. It was the way he noticed the small things. The tired look in her eyes, the way she would pause and breathe when the pressure was too much. It was the way he would always offer to help, even when it wasn't his job. It was the subtle way he made her feel like she mattered, something she rarely felt in this environment. The atmosphere in the restaurant was thick with tension that evening. The usual energy was missing. No lively chatter, no laughter, just the hum of kitchen appliances and the clinking of silverware. Even the buzz of the dining room seemed muted, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. It wasn't unusual for the team to feel the strain of a long week, but tonight there was a palpable unease in the air, something that seemed to settle on every worker like a weight they couldn't shake off. Liam, still working undercover as Nick, felt the shift. He had been increasingly aware of the toxic undercurrents in the restaurant, but today it was harder to ignore. It wasn't just the stress of the dinner rush, nor the tiredness settling in from the long shifts. It was the way certain staff members were treating Emma. He had noticed it over the past few days, but tonight it reached a boiling point. He wasn't sure if it was her quiet resistance or if she was just an easy target, but she was being treated differently than the rest. The head chef, Mark, had been particularly hard on her lately, and his critical remarks were getting sharper by the day. He would bark at her for the slightest mistake, ignoring the fact that the kitchen was under pressure from all sides. And it wasn't just him. Some of the other staff, especially the more senior waiters, seemed to take pleasure in making her feel small. It was subtle at first, little snide comments, mocking her when she dropped a plate, making her the butt of jokes. But over the past few days, it had escalated. She was being isolated, and it wasn't hard to see why. Emma, who had always worn her heart on her sleeve, was now a target of their cruelty. Liam knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He had spent too many days watching, trying to understand the dynamics of the restaurant, but now he could no longer turn a blind eye. It was time to act. It was nearing the end of another grueling shift. The restaurant was nearly empty. The last few tables were finishing their meals, and the kitchen was beginning to settle into a lull. Emma, though still exhausted, was moving quickly between tables, ensuring everything was cleared, all while offering her usual warm smile to the dwindling guests. But when she reached table 5, she froze. One of the senior waiters, Tom, had made a cutting remark in front of a group of customers. It wasn't the first time he had taken a jab at Emma, but this time it felt different. His words were sharper, and the guests were laughing, oblivious to the discomfort it was causing her. Emma stood still for a moment, trying to force a smile, but her face betrayed her. She was humiliated. Liam watched from the kitchen door, his frustration bubbling to the surface. He could see the way Emma's posture stiffened, the tightness in her jaw. She was trying to hold it together, but it was clear she was reaching her limit. His instinct was to step in, to say something, to make them stop. But the last thing Emma wanted was him to make a scene. He knew she didn't want to draw attention to herself, to seem weak or vulnerable in front of the others. But he couldn't stand by and watch her be treated like this any longer. Without thinking, Liam pushed open the door to the dining room and walked toward the table. "Hey, Tom." Liam's voice was calm but firm. It didn't take long for Tom to notice him, but the expression on his face quickly shifted from casual amusement to irritation. "What's up, Nick?" Tom said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I think that's enough," Liam said, his gaze steady as he locked eyes with Tom. "You don't need to make fun of her in front of the customers. It's unprofessional." Tom snorted, clearly taken aback by the sudden confrontation. "What? I was just having a bit of fun." "Yeah, well, I don't think Emma thinks it's funny," Liam shot back, keeping his voice level. He wasn't trying to escalate the situation. He just wanted Tom to understand the gravity of his behavior. The air in the restaurant shifted. The few remaining customers had grown quiet, sensing the tension in the air. Mark, the head chef, had emerged from the kitchen at the sound of raised voices, his presence a looming shadow over the confrontation. He looked between Liam and Tom, sensing an opportunity to reinforce his authority. "What's going on here?" Mark's voice boomed as he walked over, taking in the scene with a glare that immediately silenced the room. Liam glanced at Emma, who was standing a few feet away, trying to act like she wasn't paying attention, but the way she was gripping the edge of the counter betrayed her nervousness. "I don't think it's appropriate to treat a colleague this way, especially in front of customers," Liam said, his tone unflinching. Mark's eyes narrowed, but instead of siding with Emma, he turned his attention to Liam. "You think you know better than me, Nick?" he spat. "This is how things work around here. You don't like it, you can leave." Liam's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at Emma again, this time meeting her eyes for a moment. She quickly glanced away, embarrassed, but her lips twitched into a small, grateful smile. The tension in the room was thick. Mark stood there, eyes flashing in anger, while the other staff members shifted uncomfortably, watching the scene unfold. For a moment, no one said anything. Then, Mark finally broke the silence with a sharp, dismissive gesture. "Fine, but don't think this is over." Liam didn't respond, but he felt the weight of Mark's words. As Mark stormed off back to the kitchen, Tom muttered something under his breath and returned to his duties, leaving Liam standing there, still facing Emma. The restaurant felt oddly quiet after the confrontation. The customers had finished their meals, and the staff had mostly retreated to the back. Emma was clearing a few final tables, her movements stiff, as if trying to shake off the aftermath of the tense moment. Liam walked over to her, his footsteps slow. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice just above a whisper, as though not wanting to disrupt the fragile calm that had settled in the room. Emma nodded, but her expression was conflicted. "I'm fine. I'm used to it." Liam could tell that she was lying. She was trying to be strong, trying to brush it off as if it didn't matter, but he knew it did. "You shouldn't have to be used to it," he said, his voice firm. "Nobody should treat you like that." Emma's eyes softened, and for the first time in days, a real, genuine smile tugged at her lips. It wasn't a smile of politeness. It was one of relief, of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She paused for a moment, considering her next words. "I don't want to make a scene. I just want to get through my shift without anyone making it harder than it already is." Liam stepped closer, his expression earnest. You don't have to go through this alone. You're not invisible to me, Emma. You're not just here to do the job and disappear." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the sincerity in his words. And she did. There was something real in the way he spoke, something that made her believe him. The spark was no longer just a flicker between them. It was starting to grow. Their connection had been building, but now, in the aftermath of the confrontation, something had shifted. Liam had stood up for her, had taken her side when no one else would, and Emma, for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to feel something deeper than just survival. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. The days following the confrontation had been tense, but a strange sense of relief had washed over Emma. She no longer felt the weight of the restaurant's toxic atmosphere bearing down on her. In the moments when she could breathe, she noticed the subtle shifts in the way the other staff interacted with her. It wasn't as though things had completely changed. Mark's biting remarks were still common, and Tom's smirking jabs were never too far away. But there was something different now. A shift. A quiet acknowledgement that Emma wasn't as alone as she had been before. Liam had done more than simply stand up for her. He had offered her something she hadn't realized she needed: solidarity. The next few shifts passed in relative silence, a hush hanging over the restaurant as the staff returned to their routines. Mark and Tom were still cold toward Emma, but they kept their distance, careful not to provoke another confrontation. The rest of the team seemed to step back a little, sensing the change in the air. Emma didn't feel the same overwhelming isolation anymore. And though things weren't perfect, she no longer felt like she was walking on eggshells every time she stepped into the restaurant. Liam, for his part, continued to work beside her, though he kept his distance in a way that suggested he didn't want to make things harder for her. The line between them, which had always been subtle, began to shift once more. He was still the quiet, earnest Nick who worked behind the scenes. But now there was something more. He had become her ally, a quiet, supportive force she didn't fully understand, but was beginning to trust. The following days brought a slow, steady change between them. Liam was careful to remain professional, always respectful of Emma's space, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of understanding between them. They began to share small moments, exchanges of glances, brief conversations as they worked side by side. Each interaction seemed to deepen the connection they were building, and Emma found herself looking forward to their conversations more and more. That night, after the kitchen had been cleaned and the final details attended to, the two of them found themselves alone once again. The restaurant had emptied out for the night, the hum of silence now echoing through the halls. Emma stood near the door, preparing to leave, when Liam turned to her with a question on his lips. "Do you want to grab a coffee? Just to talk?" he asked, his voice gentle. It wasn't a date, and they both knew that. It was just a chance to be themselves, outside the confines of the restaurant. Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. There was no reason not to, no reason to keep hiding from the connection that was slowly forming between them. "Yeah, I'd like that." As they stepped out into the cool night air, the world outside seemed vast and quiet, a contrast to the chaos of the restaurant. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a sense of peace, like she wasn't carrying the weight of everything on her shoulders anymore. It wasn't just the relief of having someone to talk to. It was the realization that there were people out there who saw her for who she truly was, not just the person she was expected to be. And as Liam walked beside her, offering his quiet support, Emma felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The walls she had built for so long were starting to come down, piece by piece, and with every step she took, she felt more and more ready to let herself be seen for who she truly was. Liam had always known that he couldn't keep his secret forever. The act of pretending to be Nick, a struggling, unassuming restaurant worker, had begun to wear thin. As much as he had wanted to stay under the radar, to learn more about the people around him and the inner workings of his family's business, he had to acknowledge one undeniable truth. The longer he stayed in this facade, the more complicated everything became, especially with Emma. The cracks had started to show after the coffee date. A simple, innocent outing that allowed them to step out of the confines of the restaurant and connect on a deeper, more personal level. Emma had opened up to him more than she ever had to anyone, sharing bits and pieces of her life, her dreams, her frustrations. Liam had felt a sense of guilt creep in every time she spoke with such openness. He knew that his role as Nick was starting to feel like a betrayal to her. It was a rainy Tuesday when everything came crashing down. Liam sat alone in the staff room, nervously fiddling with his phone. He had been mulling over this moment for days, weighing the cost of revealing his true identity. He knew it was time. The weight of the lie was unbearable, and Emma deserved the truth. If their relationship, whatever it was going to survive, it had to be built on honesty. As he stared at his phone, the text he had written to her lay open, but unsent. He hadn't been able to bring himself to hit send. But before he could contemplate it any longer, the door to the staff room opened, and Emma stepped in, her eyes looking tired, but kind. She didn't see him at first, her gaze focused on the floor as she rummaged through the cabinets for her apron. "Morning," Liam said, his voice unsteady. Emma looked up, giving him a bright but distracted smile. "Hey Nick, what's up?" And that was it. The moment he'd been dreading. The moment when the illusion of Nick was going to shatter. He stood up from his seat, taking a deep breath. "Emma, we need to talk." Emma's expression shifted, her smile fading slightly. There was an edge in his voice, one she hadn't heard before. She set the apron down and walked toward him. "What's wrong, Liam?" she asked, concern creeping into her tone. The way he used her real name now felt different than before, more significant. Liam swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. The words he had practiced in his head didn't come out the way he expected. Instead, he blurted, "I'm not Nick. I'm Liam Westbrook, the owner of this restaurant." For a moment, Emma didn't speak. She stared at him, her face frozen in disbelief. "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper, a stunned expression on her face. Liam could barely hold her gaze, the weight of his confession making him feel smaller than he'd ever felt before. He had deceived her for so long. "I know I should have told you sooner," Liam continued, his voice shaky. "But I wanted to understand what this place was really like, what people are really like, without my name or money getting in the way. And I didn't want you to treat me any differently because of who I am." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. I didn't think I'd fall for you." Emma stood there, silent, processing the revelation. The hurt in her eyes was unmistakable, but it wasn't just pain. It was confusion, anger, betrayal. "So everything was a lie?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Liam nodded, his face crumpling with regret. "I'm sorry, Emma. I never meant for this to happen, but I had to tell you. You deserve the truth." Emma took a step back, the distance between them growing like an invisible chasm. She shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what to say, Liam. I don't know who you are anymore." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Emma turned on her heel and walked out of the staff room, her movements stiff and her head down. Liam's heart sank as he watched her leave, unsure of how to fix what had just been broken. The days following the revelation were tense. Emma avoided Liam as much as she could, retreating into herself. She spoke only when necessary, keeping her distance both physically and emotionally. And as the days passed, Liam couldn't help but feel the growing divide between them. Every time he tried to approach her, to apologize, she pulled away. It wasn't until the following Friday that he caught a glimpse of hope. Emma had come into the staff room during a brief lull, sitting down at one of the tables to review the schedule for the week. Liam stood in the doorway, unsure of how to approach. "Emma," he said softly, testing the waters. She didn't look up, but he saw the way her fingers tightened around the pen. "I don't want to make excuses," Liam continued, walking slowly into the room. "I know I've hurt you, and I can't undo the past, but I want to explain." Emma finally looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "I don't need you to explain, Liam. I need you to understand that what you did, it hurt me. You lied to me." Liam nodded, swallowing his guilt. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that everything I said to you, everything I felt for you, that was real." For a moment, Emma didn't respond. But then, she spoke again, her voice quieter, more measured. "You should have told me, from the beginning." Liam's heart sank as he whispered, "I was scared you wouldn't see me for who I am, not just as the guy who owns a restaurant, but as someone who wants to be seen as more than just money." Emma studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Then, she let out a small sigh. "I don't know what to do with this, Liam. You've shattered the trust I had in you, and I don't know if I can rebuild that." Liam nodded, feeling every word of her rejection. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The weeks passed, and though there was a fragile, tentative truce between them, the air was still thick with unspoken words. Emma had taken a step back, needing time to process the reality of what had happened, and Liam gave her that space. He spent his time fixing the toxic work environment in the restaurant, using his newfound position to ensure that the staff felt more valued. Slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. But it wasn't until one evening, as they worked together late into the night, that the first real breakthrough came. Emma and Liam found themselves alone in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the restaurant surrounding them. Emma was finishing up her duties when she stopped, turning to face him. "Liam," she began, her voice unsure but soft. "I've been thinking about what you said, about what you're trying to do. I see now that you really do care about this place, and maybe I've been too hard on you." Liam smiled, his heart lifting at her words. "I'm trying, Emma. I promise I'm trying to do better." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I know. And maybe I can forgive you. Not for what you did, but because of what you've done since then." And in that moment, the healing began. It wasn't an instant fix, but the first step toward rebuilding the trust they had lost. Time had a funny way of healing wounds. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave people the space to grow and learn from their mistakes. And over the next few months, both Emma and Liam found a new rhythm, not just in their working relationship, but in their personal one as well. Liam continued to work at the restaurant, no longer as the mysterious Nick, but as the owner who genuinely cared for his employees. The atmosphere in the restaurant slowly became more supportive, with Emma leading the way as one of the staff's biggest advocates. And as for Emma and Liam, while their relationship was still a work in progress, they found that sometimes love wasn't about being perfect. It was about being willing to try, to forgive, and to trust again. In the end, it wasn't the facade that had brought them together. It was the raw, honest parts of themselves. And as they worked side by side, learning and growing, they realized that the journey they had begun together was only just the beginning.